Bearcat Blitz, ready to roll for our weekend edition of the show. I'm your host, Russ Heltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI, joined following Big 12 Media Days by Neil Meyer of the frontofficenews.com. We're coming at you on Talking Cats with Russ Heltman, the YouTube page, podcast platforms as well. Those include Amazon, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, you can check out the show where we are discussing Big 12 Media Days in full force to close out the week. Dante Corleone, Scott Satterfield, Brendan Sorsby, Gavin Gerhardt, and Joe Royer all in attendance in Frisco, Texas for all of those festivities. We'll talk about the biggest comments, the biggest takeaways from the event. We have Cincinnati Bearcats football on full display in Texas. And we'll also talk about some other topics as well. That includes the likes of the preseason All Big 12 and an interesting kind of one particular comment I wanted to give its own segment in the back half of the show. So we'll discuss that as well in this week's conclusion of Bearcat Blitzes. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He's Neil Meyer. Be back at it with all of that great content, great info after these messages on the Believe Network. Neil, you are returned from Texas following Big 12 Media Days in attendance, taking in all the great content and info from the Bearcats consortium of players and head coach Scott Satterfield. What was your top takeaway from the two-day event in Texas?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot to kind of break down and sit and really talk about following Big 12 Media Days, but I think the biggest takeaway for me personally was Cincinnati coming out and making an impact in the transfer portal, right? We heard all week about how retention is key throughout college football. We've heard that from Deion Sanders, just about every coach within the Big 12. They've really emphasized how much retention is key. Kenny Dillingham made a perfect statement about it, saying their top 20 guys essentially took less of a pay cut to come back because of what Arizona State was building. So, in order to hear all these guys talk about how big retention is within college football nowadays with the transfer portal and whatnot, it says a lot about what Scott Satterfield and this staff are doing because they were able to retain guys like Gavin Gerhardt, Brendan Sorsby, Joe Royer, Dante Corleone. Those are all guys who had probably a slew of different options within the college realm to go and transfer, make another move, maybe find a nice little paycheck somewhere else, or a guy like Joe Royer who could have went off to the NFL. Dante Corleone could have gone off to the NFL, but elected to come back. I think that's the biggest thing for Cincinnati was their ability to retain their top pieces and then still go out and make an impact in the transfer portal. And I think that's a very big thing to kind of go out there and talk about because Scott Satterfield even came out and said he feels like this is the best team that he has had here at Cincinnati heading into year three. And it starts with those guys that they were able to retain. Guys like Gavin Gerhardt, Brendan Sorsby, Joe Royer, Dante Corleone. Those are the heart and soul of this team, right? But then you go out and you're going and getting guys like a Tawi Walker, a Joe Cotton, a Taron Tayo in the transfer portal who can come in and make an immediate impact as well is huge. So I think that was the biggest takeaway.
I'm with you. And to piggyback off that, Neil, it's kind of the best team yet comment from Scott Satterfield that I took away. It's the fact that you
Mhm.
retained all these guys that could have gone to the transfer portal. You retained those guys that could have gone to the NFL, and you've ensuingly set yourself up to have a mixture of your first few recruiting classes that you picked to be your kind of staple players in the first 5 years, first half decade of the Scott Satterfield era, paired with the remnants of the best UC football teams in the history of the program from earlier this decade. And that is commingling and coming together now, Neil, with higher expectations than we've ever had for the Scott Satterfield led Bearcats, and justifiably because they've put the gauntlet down. Scott Satterfield threw it down, saying this was his best team that he's yet at Cincinnati. And we're about to see if it's the best team up against a schedule, Neil, that we'll see when the full kind of projections from all the analytics sites come out. But I don't imagine UC is going to have a top 30 most difficult schedule in the country or a even top 40 most difficult schedule in the country, to be honest. It's going to be very palatable. It's going to be very available for 6+, 7+, even 8+ wins, which we talked about last week, Neil, being kind of the bar to hit for a lot of members of this fan base who are, especially the more skeptical members of Scott Satterfield in this fan base, saying year three in a power conference program, you should be in the 7 to 8 to 9 win range, especially with how much investment has come to this program over the past few years. I'm not necessarily there just yet. My bar for them this season is definitely just get to that sixth win that has eluded them each of the past 2 seasons. But there are those with those heightened expectations out there. And Neil, plenty of expectation for the all Big 12 picks from the Cincinnati Bearcats. Two of them, two guys that were all Big 12 members last year to close the season, put up all Big 12 performances in 2024 and expected to do that again in 2025. We have Joe Royer and Dante Corleone named to the team. Were you surprised that there was only two guys named to the preseason all Big 12 team, or did two kind of were those the two that you were like, it's probably going to be those guys and nobody else?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that there was two. Obviously, Gavin
I
Gerhardt's
thought
been one
Jack
of the.
Dingle might get on the board or yeah, Jack, yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah, I thought he might get on the board there. Jake Golday, excuse me. I always get Jack Dingle, Jake Golday mixed up. Jake Golday is who I thought might get some early preseason love. But other than that,
Yeah, I was low key kind of maybe expecting a guy like Gavin Gerhardt, a 3-year starter, a true captain, a
yeah.
guy who's been around the program. He's been a staple for Cincinnati. I was kind of expecting maybe to see him on that list, but Joe Royer and Dante Corleone on that list, it shouldn't come as a shock to anybody. I mean, we've heard Joe kind of openly talk about how he feels like he is the best tight end in this draft. He feels like if he has a good season, he could be the number one tight end drafted. And that's what we heard all Big 12 media days about how teams ravished about how they feel like he could be a top first round draft pick, right?
Yeah,
A
what
top
got a
22
third to
pick.
fourth round grade last year
Mhm.
and decided to push his chips in to go get that first round money this season.
Yeah. And think about that, Russ. That's a huge bet on himself, right?
Yeah.
Because many third, fourth round draft picks, that's what, a $4 to $5 million easy slot, maybe even a little bit more. And Joe pushed his chips in to come back and have a big season for Cincinnati. And if he does that, there's a chance that where Joe could be pocketing close to $25 million if he's a first round draft pick. So overall, Joe Royer's betting on himself, and respectfully, it could pay off in big dividends. But I'm not surprised to see him first team all conference or a Big 12 preseason all conference. I'm not surprised to see Dante Corleone either on that list. But the reason I say Dante Corleone too, he even kind of told reporters he didn't feel fully 100% healthy toward till basically December, the end of the season. Like, so now
I
that
mean,
he's got
his
3 years.
entire conditioning plan was wiped out off the board for all of
Mhm.
summer. I mean, if you get all of your summer conditioning knocked out, that's not surprising at all to see a guy, especially carrying that much weight and having to play at that size like Dante does. There's not as much time during the season to get the conditioning to where you want to be.
Right. And when that all happens, it wipes away. Like we saw what he went through last season. We know he was still conditioning and whatnot, but it was like, okay, what's the game plan? Like nobody
Right.
knew
Touch
what
and
was
go.
going to
Yeah.
happen for Dante Corleone last season. We saw him doing sprints throughout fall camp. We saw him getting some pads and run, do some sprints as well, but he didn't do live action, Russ, until what? Week 2 versus Pitt.
Yeah.
So I mean, at that point, you're 2 months behind the game, essentially, in terms of getting out there, actually hitting people. So for him to have a full off season, I'm fully excited for him heading into the senior season. And Russ, before we note anything into the next subject here, I want to talk about how ready Dante Corleone is for the season. That man ate a 35-ounce steak down in Texas that I heard, and then took one to go. So the big fella is ready to eat on and off the field. He is ready to demolish the Big 12 this season. And I'm excited for it, man. I couldn't be any happier to see Dante Corleone back in full strength. He is just a blast to be around and have around a university. He represents Cincinnati through and through, but he is going to demolish Big 12 offensive lines this season. And I fully believe that now that he is fully healthy.
Speaking of offensive lines, it gets us to our final topic of segment one here. Already have a starting offensive line seemingly on the table, Neil. Scott Satterfield left nothing to guessing in his press conference on Tuesday afternoon. And it looks like we're going to get a mixture of Gavin Gerhardt at center, Joe Cotton at left tackle, Terran Tayo either at left or right guard, and then Evan Tangascall at the opposite guard position, followed by DeAndre Buford starting for a third consecutive season at right tackle for the Cincinnati Bearcats football team. A little surprised, Neil. I'm a little surprised that Buford was already gifted and seemingly earned the spot at the right tackle position before we've even gotten to fall camp, considering how poorly he has played in a Cincinnati Bearcats uniform. You just got to call it like you see it here. He's been flat out terrible at Cincinnati. Really, really bad blocking in both facets of the game. He's played over 1,200 snaps for Cincinnati, Neil, over the past 2 seasons, grading 55 or lower on Pro Football Focus in both campaigns. Improved a little bit last year, was a little bit better, but still not necessarily a stalwart option at the right tackle position. And that's the number one question mark, I think, for this entire offense is that right tackle spot, considering they've already uh, heavily shored up the wide receiver core throughout this offseason. And I don't really have any questions about that, or obviously any questions about Joe Royer in that tight end room, or the running back room, or the quarterback room. It's really a big magnifying glass on DeAndre Buford in that right tackle spot. And how quickly he can solidify himself against Nebraska and make sure nobody comes nipping at his heels. That's the big question for me. And will somebody come nipping at his heels throughout fall camp when the pads start clacking? Very, very interesting that we already have a vocalized starting five from Scott Satterfield, a question that was prompted because of your question at the press conference. So thank you, Neil, for asking that.
Yeah, and I think that was the reason I asked that question was obviously that was a big issue, right? Everybody talks about the offensive line and how important it is to a football team, but Cincinnati had so much continuity on that offensive line throughout recent years between guys like D'Artagnan Tinsley. Luke Kandra is not going to be an easy guy to replace. Neither is John Williams. John Williams, I don't think Russ in his 3 years of starting didn't have one injury. I don't think
He
he
was
missed a
he talk
practice.
about a stalwart. That's what John Williams became,
I
especially
don't
in
think
that
he
final
missed a
season.
I don't think he missed a practice in his 3 years of starting where I've covered him. I don't think he missed a
Elevated himself to an NFL talent, NFL
so
draft
on
pick.
top
He was the only NFL
mhm,
draft pick
only draft pick.
this year.
And so it's never going to be easy to fill the likes of those guys, right? But the biggest question was this offseason, Russ, was you had to ask about it, considering the depth at the offensive line position last year when guys were banged up. D'Artagnan Tinsley was banged up some time. Luke Kandra was banged up for majority of the back half of the season. And then DeAndre Buford struggled at times. It was like, where was Cincinnati's depth at, right? Last season, I felt like they didn't have much depth at the offensive line position. I think Scott Satterfield and this staff could even say that as well. So for them, they made it a priority to go out this offseason. And I mean, they made it a priority right away. You land Tarantayo, then you get a massive human being in Joe Cotton to come in and play an impact. I think everybody knew those two guys were going to start. And Joe Cotton had offers. Michigan was on his butt, I heard, down to the wire about trying to get
Yep.
him up to Ann Arbor. So for Cincinnati to persuade him away from a powerhouse like Michigan was huge. And then Tarantayo, I mean, Russ, I get more and more fascinated by him every day that you read something about it, right? Like that video of him squatting in the weight room. I think you and I talked about it. I confirmed with Gavin Gerhardt that Tarantino was squatting nearly 700 pounds in that video.
Substantial.
The which is the program record at UC within this football team as of right now. And apparently, Gavin said that Taryn is going for 7 plates on each side heading into this week. So think about that. The 7 plates on each side is actually crazy. So to get a massive human being like Taryn Tayo to come in there, and I mean, we have heard all week about how coaches have raved about how he's ready to come in and take that leadership role, right? It's never easy being the new guy in the room, but being the new guy and coming in and pushing people and being that leader and coming from a smaller school like Ball State to a Power Four level in Cincinnati, like despite not playing any snaps at the Power Four level for Cotton and Tayo, it seems like they both have been coming in ready to take that leadership role and kind of get their hands into the fire there. And Gavin Gerhardt even mentioned it. He said it was good to see those guys step up and take that leadership role because guys like Gavin will be gone next season when they run out of eligibility. So overall, I'm glad to see those two. Evan Tangasdal, I think, is going to be a huge stalwart at the right guard position. Russ, you and I have got to see his development over the years. I've been very impressed with him.
Yeah,
I
I have
think
a lot less question marks about Tangastal, especially he's not coming in blind. He played 127 snaps at varying spots on the line last season, flipped between left and right guard, and was solid. Had a 64.6 Pro Football
mm,
Focus grade, and you never really noticed him destroying any plays or anything like that, which is what you don't want to notice offensive linemen unless it's a pancake block in the open field.
Right, and we even asked Scott Satterfield about it, about Evan, and he raved about it. Was like Evan's one of the strongest guys on our team. And Russ, you and I saw that firsthand. Like we looked at some practice at some moments. We're like, man, Evan's really moving some defensive linemen here at practice this week. Like, could he be a guy that comes in and sees time? And throughout spring ball, you saw that. And I mean, you see the video of him the other day in the weight room. And first of all, we're talking about the weight room. Coach Palazetti's got these guys working this offseason, Russ. I mean, I don't think we've seen a guy squat nearly 700 pounds. We haven't seen a guy, Evan Tengenstall, in reference, cranking out, what was that, 26, 27 reps of 225 earlier in the season. Like, he's got these guys working in the weight room, that new weight room in the new IPF. So, overall, to see Evan kind of crank out 26, it shows the strength, it shows the power, but now he's got that opportunity. He's been here for 3 years. He kind of knows the system. He knows what Cincinnati's football's about. He's got to learn from guys like Luke Kandra, John Williams, Gavin Gerhardt, D'Artagnan Tinsley. The list goes on for a guy like Evan Tengenstall. But now that he's ready to come in and now he has the opportunity to step into the fire, I'm excited for him. But that right tackle position, I was not expecting a response saying DeAndre Buford was going to be set in stone as your starter, especially when fall camp is 2 weeks away. Like, I thought maybe you might see some guys that might go out there and contend with that, like a Nolan Latalippe or a Ethan Green or an Aiden Pastoriza potentially. So I mean, overall, you're kind of thinking, okay, who's going to be these depth pieces and how have these guys really kind of stood out throughout the offseason workouts heading into fall camp? But sounds like Cincinnati is set in stone on your starting line being Joe Cotton, Tarantayo, Gavin Gerhardt, Evan Tangenstall, and then DeAndre Buford from left to right.
We shall see. Maybe it was a full set in stone, or maybe it was just Scott Satterfield naming off names, and we'll get a shakeup in the middle of August or something like that. Would not be surprised either way with that right tackle position. Won't be surprised with anything that happens with it. But pretty strong feelings, Neil, with the other four spots being relatively accounted for on that offensive line. A huge, huge part of this program. They need that offensive line to be humming for that run game, to be able to unlock Brendan Sorsby's legs as well, and be able to unlock some play action and be able to unlock more explosive plays this coming season. That was a highlight theme of the Big 12 Media Days conversations. And the Bearcats know they need to get more explosive in the passing attack, and they need to find some more variance, I would say, coming their way that is out of their control. And we'll talk about that a little bit after this break on Bearcat Blitz to close out the show. Final few minutes of Bearcat Blitz here as we carry you into the weekend on the Believe Network. Neil Meyer, my co-host, Russ Eltman, your host of Bearcat Blitz. And Dante Corleone, Neil, brought up an interesting point in his, I believe it was credit you guys at Front Office News, your sit down, kind of breakout local media only interviews with Dante Corleone, Joe Royer, Brennan Sorsby, and Gavin Gerhardt. The fact that, Neil, you see at multiple points last season, late in games, despite being a pretty well-disciplined team in overall penalty numbers, just when you look at them nationally ranked, not getting penalized very often throughout full games, but they had major penalties strike them in brutal moments 3 or 4 times, especially a couple times in the losing streak to close the season at 5-7 last year. And Corleone, quote, noted, we played teams that didn't have many penalties. And he's right about that. We'll get to it in just a second. We had 4 or 5 small penalties that really changed the whole trajectory of the game, the course of our season, jumping off sides, the layup games on us, false starts multiple times. So it's like those small things. If we didn't have that, we win the game. Now, Corleone, Neil, is not a committer of these penalties at all. According to Pro Football Focus, he's committed 1 penalty in his entire career, and that penalty came during the 2024 season. So, I mean, Corleone is leader defined, discipline defined, but Neil, UC's opponents were amazingly disciplined, like brutally disciplined compared to the rest of the entire nation. 5.4 penalties per game committed by UC opponents. That was among the top 20 nationally in terms of fewest penalties from an opponent. They were among they were just unlucky in that sense. Their opponents just did not commit many penalties, and that stat placed them among the top 20 unluckiest teams when it came to facing opponent penalties. And Cincinnati, Neil, committed just the 32nd most penalties in the entire country. So the fact that they are already entering the season knowing they need to get more disciplined, they're harping on that, they're hammering that in, already having been pretty disciplined last year. And you have that 5.4 mark on the other side that is, I mean, penalties to me are like defense, are like a lot of defensive numbers or are like a lot of red zone numbers where there's just variance every year. There's not going to be a rhyme or reason to it. And you would think that they will get a little bit higher mistake rate from their opponents this coming fall, maybe in the 6.5 to 7 penalties range. You get a 15-yard penalty here, a 15-yard extra penalty there, and that can be the difference in this conference. Neil, we've talked about how close the margins are between 5 wins and 6 wins, 6 wins and 7 wins, 8 wins and 7 wins, or 9 wins and 10 wins, and getting a punch ticket to the Big 12 championship game. That really stuck out to me, Neil. Just the fact that Cincinnati's already pretty disciplined. They already don't commit a lot of penalties. They're hammering that home to a T this offseason, and they're bound, you would think, to get a little bit better penalty variance on the other side from their opponents. What do you think?
Yeah, and it's worth noting too, Russ, when you're talking about the penalties for Cincinnati, they were 5 plays away, essentially, 4 or 5 plays away, essentially, a season ago from being a 9-win team.
Yeah,
Think about it. The
crazy.
Texas Tech penalty that was on Texas Tech that costed a 10-second runoff when Cincinnati was driving downfield. That's one that hurts. And again, that was a penalty that was not on Cincinnati, it was on Texas Tech, but that hurts in that instinct. And then you have just these smaller little penalties that could have hurt games. And it's funny you bring this topic up, Russ, because we actually talked about this situation with Gavin Gerhardt, and it was a great question by Keegan Nickerson of Bearcat Journal. He asked him, he was like, "Hey, like, how are you guys being more disciplined and whatnot?" And the play that Keegan was referencing was a play that neglected a 70-yard touchdown for Joe Royer, who was actually sitting right next to Gavin when this
The
was going
Miami
down.
game during the Miami game.
Miami penalty, and they
Yeah,
were talking about how they have to be more disciplined. And Gavin actually gave a great answer. He broke down that play for, it was probably like a minute and a half answer. He broke it down, what actually happened on that play. But these guys have noted that they have to be more disciplined. And in order to win games in the Big 12, I mean, everybody knows this is arguably one of the best conferences in college football, right? So you got to be more disciplined. And to see them kind of harp on that and says, "Hey, we got to be more disciplined. We got to be more disciplined." And to hear them be vocal about it and really kind of preach it is huge. And I when I say discipline, Russ, I mean these guys landed back home from Big 12 media days. This is just an example. When they got home from Big 12 media days, it was probably 9:30, 10 o'clock on Tuesday night. These guys had lifting. They had to be in the weight room at 4:30 in the morning, Joe Royer and Gavin told us. So they were right off the jet, boom, right back. Let's get right back into work and let's get disciplined and get ready for the season. That's the kind of discipline that they're talking about. Now they just got to translate it to the field, of course. But to hear them preach about discipline, discipline, discipline is huge, especially when we have heard it from not only all four leaders who are out there representing Cincinnati, but we heard it from Scott Satterfield as well. So when you have all these guys bought in on how this team has to be more disciplined in order to win games, they understand the pressure that is on them. But they also understand the situation where if they were tightened up a little bit more in last season, that things probably would have been a lot different. So for them to have that is huge. And when you have your leaders speaking about that with those guys is also huge. But I'm excited to see what fall camp might look like. But Russ, you and I are going to get our first glimpse of what Camp Higher Ground and what this discipline might actually look like here in a couple weeks. And it's also worth noting too. I don't know if you listened in the interview, the full interview, but it sounds like Cincinnati's going to go 1 week at Camp Higher Ground and 1 week back at the IPF. So it was kind of great to get the insight on that as well.
yeah, it's got
But
to
you
be
and I
hard.
talked about it
It's
a
got to
couple
be
weeks.
hard to get away from that IPF, man. Even though the Camp Higher Ground experience is awesome and unique and wonderful, like you guys have so many bells and whistles and so much more access to things that will help you get better over this month at that
Hmm.
IPF than you do at Camp Higher Ground. We'll see.
And it's great to note too that Coach
Yeah,
Satterfield even mentioned it. He was like, "Hey, Camp Higher Ground, they know is like a essential. It's a Cincinnati staple, right? I mean, when you go out there, Russ, you think about it. Their access to recovery, like you and I have seen it. I mean, shit, I've been dunked in one before back in the day, one of those cold tubs. I'm not a fan, so if there any players listening, do not dunk me in a cold tub this year. I would greatly appreciate it. But overall, the cold tubs out there, like it's just one giant cooler, and you have three or four guys in it at a time with ice. Like, think about it, Russ. You have that out there at Camp High Ground versus the new indoor practice facility. You have all these essentials. You have your cryotherapy. You have your red light stuff that's coming
Right.
in.
All this stuff, man.
You
It's
have
like
all the
I'm all
essentials.
for
It's like
Camp Higher Ground, but I want to see this program hit the highest heights it can possibly hit. And I just don't know how you could argue going to Camp Higher Ground for the entire month of training camp is going to help them hit higher heights than all of the tools they have accessible to them in this brand new hundred plus
facility.
million-dollar facility they just built. And I'm sure they want to get used as much as
And
possible.
and
But
for us,
it's a tough thing to gauge though, Neil, right? Because it's like you want to have that bonding and all those memories and all of the history of great seasons that have happened after a campfire ground experience. So it's a tough
but I also
either
know
side of this blade.
for us on the media aspect of things, when you hear, okay, you got 1 week at higher ground, you have 1 week at the IPF, you and I are thinking, you're like, yes,
Oh
back
yeah, I'd
inside.
much rather go to the IPF than go to Camp High Ground. It's like a
Because Camp
45
Higher Ground,
minute hour drive.
people don't know about the Camp Higher Ground stuff, but when you're the media and you're watching practice, there's no shade. No
No,
shade. You are
no,
getting cooked just like these guys. You're not out there running in pads hitting each other though, but you're gonna be sweating. You're gonna lose a couple pounds of of weight when you're out there at Camp Higher Ground. I feel like you're moving around all the time, you're sweating it out. So I mean, I do love me some Camp Higher Ground, Russ. Don't get me wrong. I will miss the food. The food is fantastic.
yeah.
But when you have that $134 million practice facility sitting right there at your expense, it's like, okay, let's take advantage of it. Especially too, I think the reason they're doing it too, Russ, is it's a short year, right? Or it's a shorter year, essentially having a week zero game. I think that is huge, right? Because I think camp
And you're
breaks,
traveling that first weekend as well, so
right.
you
And
have even less time.
I think I saw on Gianni Contosis, he posted an Instagram story while I was in Texas on Wednesday, I believe, and it said like 18 days until fall camp or whatnot. So think about it, Russ. If you do 18 days, that's hitting about July 20th or 24th or so, roughly that time range for starting. That's 2 weeks earlier than what Camp High Ground usually was in years past, and that's all because of the Nebraska game. So I'm excited for that, but also Camp Higher Ground being a little bit earlier and a little shorter, it's huge, especially when you have a quote unquote, I don't know how people really look at it, a week zero, a week one game versus Nebraska where it's at a neutral site. You got to go on the road. So season's coming a little bit earlier this year for Cincinnati.
That it is. Can't wait to cover it all and can't wait to cover fall camp, which, as Neil mentioned, we're roughly 2 weeks away from the start of it right here on Bearcat Blitz. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.